Among the most perplexing and tragic events in rock history, it left many wondering what had happened. Charlie Watts, the Rolling Stones rhythm section, died in 2021. Many were hoping that his bandmates would take center stage at his funeral. On the contrary, they did not appear anywhere. Not even Ronnie Wood, Mick Jagger, or Keith Richards. The reason for their disappearance is significantly more intricate than anybody had anticipated. This reason shouldn't come as a surprise to you. Midway through the 1980s, Charlie Watts is going through a really difficult time in his life. Here is where the story starts. Watts was the steadying influence that kept the band from going overboard for the majority of his tenure. Watts keeps up his image as a moderate, in contrast to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who are in the spotlight for their rock and roll lifestyles. However, that perception started to fall apart in 1983. The harmful effects of his alcohol and drug addiction, which had been moderate at first, quickly became catastrophic. Watts would come to see that his substance abuse was a destructive process rather than an attempt to escape his family's growing problems. He thought about how he had used them to cope with issues at home. It seemed like a midlife crisis to me. What I do know is that I went through a complete identity crisis in 1983 and emerged around 1986. Because of how I acted, I almost divorced my wife and lost everything. An individual frequently referred to be the Stones' moral compass made a shocking confession. Even before the band became famous, his wife Shirley had been by his side. Watts subsequently admitted that the band's turbulent years put Shirley's devotion to the test. Over time, he came to the realization that continuing along his current path could lead to the loss of both his marriage and his identity. He reclaimed command of his life by the decade's second half. Watts made yet another big choice about his way of living in the late 80s. A cessation of smoking was imminent for him. It was a huge step toward better health for a man whose health had suffered greatly due to decades of performing under the constant pressures of touring and recording. But not even this self-control would protect him from the medical problems that might arise in the future. Watts' throat cancer was detected in June 2004. The revelation came as a shock to the band, as well as its fans. The cancer went into remission after months of intense radiation treatment, which he endured. Watts recalled that incident, saying, "I went into the hospital and 8 months later, Mick said, 'We're going to do a record, but we'll only do it when you're ready.'" As promised, the Stones patiently waited. Watts was not pushed to return until he felt ready, while Jagger, Richards, and Ronnie would occupy themselves with songwriting. Upon his readiness, he accompanied them to the studio to begin recording 2005, the album that would later be known as A Bigger Bang. Surprisingly, he set out on a punishing 2-year global tour to promote the album immediately following his recovery. Looking back, Watts made a joke about how he always gets sick anytime we stop, so maybe he should just keep going. Despite the obvious effects of aging and disease, Watts persisted in touring and recording with the Stones for the subsequent 15 years. However, his health once again became an issue in 2021. The group revealed that Watts would not be participating in the band's next No Filter US tour on August 5th of that year. Following what was reportedly heart surgery, he and his physicians determined that he required a thorough recovery before hitting the road again. In Watts' almost 60 years with the Stones, the choice represented an unusual absence. Steve Jordan was summoned by the band to maintain the tour, someone with whom I've worked closely for many years, to fill in as drummer for the time being. It was thought that Jordan, who had collaborated with Richards and the Costly Winos before, was one of the few drummers who could temporarily replace Watts' shoes. Charlie Watts, 80 years old, died in the Royal Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, London, on August 24, 2021. Squamous cell cancer was the cause of his death, a malignancy. Watts spent his last hours with his family, maintaining the dignity and solitude that had characterized his life. A private funeral was held in his honor, with only close relatives and friends present, as the man who had been the Rolling Stones rhythm section for almost 60 years past died. The music industry was rocked by the news. Many of Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and even Bill Wyman, the band's former bassist, paid public tributes to him. Richards uploaded a spare but moving shot of a drum set with a closed sign dangling from it, while Jagger contributed a happy snapshot of Watts grinning. Beyond the Stones, there was an enormous outpouring, which spoke of their fraternity, and Wyman, who had left the Stones decades before, remembered Watts as a handsome man. Music industry heavyweights and icons shared their condolences and tributes. Among the numerous who paid tribute to Watts' artistry and character were Elton John, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney of the Beatles, Brian Wilson, Pete Townsend, Nick Mason, Roger Daltrey, U2 members, Bryan Adams, Liam Gallagher, Brian May, Roger Taylor, Kenny Jones, Chad Smith, Questlove, Peter Criss, and Max Weinberg. More than simply a talented drummer, he was an icon to them. A rare blend of talent, modesty, and elegance, he was a rock-solid gentleman. A virtual temple sprung up on the Rolling Stones' official website. For 10 days, a single black-and-white photo of Watts was substituted for every page. Just his presence. No words, no directions. A moving homage was paid in silence. Just 2 days after he passed away, Jason Isbell and Brittany Spencer paid tribute to Watts with a live performance of Gimme Shelter, demonstrating that his impact extended well beyond the Rolling Stones' discography. Next, on August 27th, the band's social media accounts published a heartfelt video tribute. It was a montage of photos and vintage footage paired to the Rolling Stones' 1974 song, If You Can't Rock Me, which begins with the lyrics, "The band's on stage. Just another night like them." The drummer has an inflated sense of self-importance. Oh yeah? The selection was ideal for die-hard admirers. It managed to convey not only his subtle energy, but also the self-aware wit that underpinned his charisma on stage. The funeral for Watts was a modest, private ceremony. In keeping with his lifelong dislike of spectacle, he was laid to rest in Devon, away from the world's cameras. But his life's festivities went on. A more in-depth look at the man behind the drums was revealed in October 2022 with the publishing of an authorized biography of Watts. In a touching memorial that Mick Jagger shared on social media on the one-year anniversary of Watts' death, the Rolling Stones' Till the Next Goodbye, Jagger's own voiceover, and historical photographs of Watts were all combined, according to Rolling Stone magazine. His estate officially activated their Facebook and Instagram pages on June 2nd, 2023, which would have been Watts' 82nd birthday. Despite his immense musical impact on rock, blues, and jazz, as well as the wonderful man adored by millions of fans across the globe, was too modest to embrace social media during his lifetime, according to a statement from his family. Despite passing away, Watts' impact went well beyond the realm of music. The news broke in September 2023 that he was planning to auction off his personal library. An autographed first edition of The Great Gatsby was among the valuables. Its estimated value is £200,000 to £300,000. This is a reflection of his discerning taste. Then, in January of 2024, yet another remarkable part of his legacy came to light. Upon learning that it had paid £16,000 to acquire a life-size reproduction of the Bayeux tapestry from Watts' estate, the Bayeux Museum in France made the announcement. It served as a gentle reminder that Watts, who was always the hushed admirer, had amassed a vast collection of art, history, and music. Finally, the much-anticipated explanation as to why the Rolling Stones skipped Charlie Watts' burial has arrived. The Rolling Stones were reportedly in the midst of final preparations for their long-postponed no-filter U.S. tour in Boston when Johnny passed away. This wasn't just a test run. Stage crews, lighting design groups, sound experts, and months of meticulous planning went into the enormous undertaking. The fireworks and video displays were both meticulously planned and executed. The hundreds of people whose livelihoods were dependent on the trip would have been hit hard by the domino effect of postponements and financial losses caused by canceling or even pausing at that time. A heavy sense of obligation to their fan base was also felt by the band. Ticket buyers endured another postponement of the trip as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Stones' credibility and the spirits of their fans would have taken a serious hit had there been any more postponement. A number of individuals had been clinging to their tickets since 2019. The situation became much more complex due to the international travel limitations imposed in August 2021. Strict quarantine regulations applied to flights departing from the US to the UK. People were required to remain in isolation upon arrival in Britain, and the same regulations applied upon return to the United States. Watts' burial would have necessitated weeks of quarantine, which Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood just did not have the time to endure. Before the trip ever started, there was a chance that it may all be scrapped. Their decision-making process likewise prioritized health and safety. At the time, the Delta strain of COVID-19 was quickly spreading, and important members of the band or crew may have been rendered ineffective if they had been exposed to it, especially in crowded travel environments or meetings. In order to keep their touring parties safe, the Stones had worked very hard to create a protective bubble. Even for a funeral, breaking that barrier could have derailed the tour and put everyone's safety at jeopardy. Another consideration, based on Charlie Watts' character, existed beyond the practical considerations. He despised superfluous show and had always treasured solitude. Small, low-key, and attended solely by close relatives and friends, his funeral in Devon was a reflection of his ideals. According to those closest to him, it was the ideal farewell he would have desired. According to Sam Cutler, Charlie would have despised any kind of drama. The Rolling Stones reciprocated the feeling, realizing that it would have been completely out of character for him to have a public funeral. Even so, the band came up with significant methods to pay tribute to him. Opening each show on the No Filter tour was a touching tribute video honoring Charlie, featuring vintage footage of him playing the drums with grace and accuracy. In a little but significant gesture of grief, they changed their iconic tongue and lips emblem to black and white. Throughout the tour, Mick Jagger frequently addressed the audience to pay tribute to his friend, and the performances were devoted to his memory. Beyond the stage, the tributes continued. A powerful, silent statement was conveyed by Keith Richards when he shared a photo of Charlie's drum set with a closed sign atop it. Watts contributed a gentle delight to the band, and Mick Jagger released a photo of him smiling brightly to remind fans of that. These touching farewells were in keeping with Charlie's modest manner and won over his millions of supporters all over the world without being ostentatious or dramatic. Let us reminisce about Charlie Watts's early days with his band. Midway through 1962, a teenage Charlie Watts, well known as a jazz drummer in London, crossed paths with a band of up-and-coming rhythm and blues artists who would go on to alter the trajectory of rock music. Watts was well known in the city's club scene back then, especially at establishments that served the expanding blues scene in Britain. He initially crossed paths with Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Ian Stu Stewart, Brian Jones, and Ian in this realm. They were all regulars at London's rhythm and blues venues. Even though they hit it off musically, Watts took his time to join their indie band. He was already enjoying the luxuries of being a working musician in early 1960s London, when the Stones couldn't compete with his consistent income from performances. Watts was not easily convinced to forego his financial security for an improving band, especially because the group was still playing tiny venues, frequently for little or no pay. Watts was approached with the opportunity to join the Rolling Stones in January 1963, but he ultimately declined. A watershed moment for the group came with his choice, forming a roster that would rule the music industry for many years to come. The Ealing Jazz Club, a meeting place for the British R&B scene, hosted his first public performance as a permanent member on February 2, 1963. At that point on, the Stones sound was built around Watts' solid, unflashy drumming. Throughout the years, Mick Jagger would often introduce him as the Wembley Whammer when he performed live, a lighthearted reference to his city and his forceful and accurate drumming style. Although he played drums for the band, Watts was much more than that. He contributed his artistic abilities to the Stones' persona and stagecraft in addition to his work as a visual artist. Watts designed the album cover, comic strips, and other early visual elements for the band's releases, including Between the Buttons. Among his many accomplishments as a band member was organizing the 1975 New York City press conference that announced the band's tour. As a shocking alternative to meeting with reporters in the usual manner, the Rolling Stones rode a flatbed truck down Fifth Avenue while playing Brown Sugar amidst the Manhattan traffic, shocking everyone in the process. Inspired by the street performances put on by New Orleans jazz bands, Watts conceptualized the extravaganza. The intricate traveling stages that the Rolling Stones used were also conceptualized by him. Watts collaborated closely with Jagger to develop and implement some of rock music's most daring stage designs. From the 1975 Tour of the Americas, where he contributed the lotus-shaped stage, to subsequent shows like the Steel Wheels Urban Jungle, Bridges to Babylon, Licks, and a Bigger Bang tours, his contributions were extensive. Each was an engineering marvel, combining the worlds of music and theater in ways that would motivate artists for decades to come. Watts was famously disciplined in his work. He proved his dependability and commitment throughout his decades-long tenure with the Stones by never missing a performance. On August 30th, 2019, at Miami, Florida's Hard Rock Stadium, he gave his last live performance with the band, bringing an end to the No Filter tour just in time for the COVID-19 epidemic to put an end to live music. Watts was an indispensable part of the Rolling Stones' character since, with Jagger and Richards, he was one of the few members to appear on every album in the band's repertoire. Although his drumming lacked flair, it was accurate, sparse, and worked flawlessly with the music, something that a lot of people thought the Stones' long-lasting groove was due to. The Rolling Stones continued to pay tribute to him in their music long after his death in 2021. The band's first studio album in 18 years, Hackney Diamonds, was released in October 2023. There were 2 songs on album that included Watts on drums, Mess Album Up and Live by the Sword. The final recordings he had done with the band before his death were a somber reminder of his enduring influence and the indelible mark he left on the sound of the greatest rock band of all time. Do you want to know more about Charlie Watts' private life? Charlie Watts wed Shirley and Shepard, who had captivated him before he ever joined the Rolling Stones. On October 14, 1964. Shirley was born on September 11, 1938, and passed away on December 16, 2022. Their romance began before the band's ascent to stardom, and Shirley was there for all of their wild years of success. Watts' private, passionately dedicated marriage stood in stark contrast to the numerous publicized and frequently turbulent partnerships of his peers. He frequently said that Shirley was the rock that kept him from losing his footing amidst the upheaval of traveling, recording, and rock star life. Serafina, the couple's daughter born in March 1968, went on to have a granddaughter, Charlotte, who is the only grandchild for Watts. Above all things, Watts treasured his family and the solitude of his home life. Watts continuously avoided discussing his private life, which lent credence to the idea that he was a shy, introverted loner who valued the simple joys of home life above the glitz and glamour of his bandmates. The marriage lasted for 57 years, which is an incredible achievement in any age, but especially noteworthy when considering the demands of celebrity. Respect, common interests, and an intimate familiarity with one another's personalities were the bedrocks of Watts and Shirley's long-lasting partnership. The pair maintained a wall between their home life and the pressures of the band, even when the Rolling Stones were at the top of their game, establishing a haven where Charlie could relax and contemplate. Halston House, their North Devon manor, was close to the North Devon settlement of Dalton. More than just a house, the property embodied Watts's devotion to the outdoors and his love of animals. Here he found creative fulfillment and emotional relief through his work at an Arabian horse stud farm. At the stud farm, he was able to devote himself fully to the art of horse breeding, a passion unrelated to the chaotic realm of rock music. Many of Watts's friends and co-workers noted that this period of his life showed a thoughtful, patient, and subtly joyous side of him that is seldom displayed on stage. Watts was well-versed in both the musical and business aspects of the Rolling Stones, both to his share in the band's corporate companies and his penchant for rural pastimes. Watts never got his driver's license, even though the Stones loved expensive cars. His appreciation for automobiles was more for their aesthetic value than their practicality. He saw them more as works of art. His one-of-a-kind and somewhat secluded outlook on life was reflected in his appreciation of automobiles as works of art rather than a practical mode of transportation. Watts has also been a cricket fan for as long as anyone can remember, a sport with strong cultural roots in the United Kingdom. He regarded cricket as more than just a pastime. It was a link to a simpler, more conventional world, and he cherished cricket artifacts with the same painstaking care he gave to drumming and stage design. The fact that he had autographed bats and old photos in his collection demonstrates how much he valued the game's artistic heritage and history. Watts achieved a happy medium between the craziness of fame and the calm of self-fulfillment via his many interests, including painting, family, horses, cricket, and cricket. In contrast to the tens of thousands of people that flocked to see the Rolling Stones perform live, Watts sought refuge in his North Devon estate, where he could be at one with nature and his family. The public image of a renowned rock drummer and the private man who devoted himself to his personal life were the two sides of his identity: tradition and basic, everlasting joys. Charlie Watts, what are your thoughts on him? Please share your thoughts with us in the space provided. We trust that this video has been of assistance to you. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe, like, and comment. Please return for more videos. Thank you for watching.